And welcome back to Game Escape. Today we're going to be talking about sports games. Now I know sports games have acquired a bad reputation amongst hardcore gamers and collectors, particularly during the 7th console generation. The critiques have been commonplace. These games are only $60 roster updates, they depreciate almost to the point of worthlessness in a year or so, and they offer very few gameplay innovations from year to year. Now, these critiques are certainly true, but there have been some diamonds in the rough this generation, and I want to look at a few of them today. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, and it is very much representative of my own opinions and gameplay preferences. Now, it's fair to say that I'm not a sports gaming expert, never claimed to be. I don't obsessively play yearly iterations of any sports game. I don't delve into every detail and minutia in these games, but I enjoy them, and I have 3 essential criteria on which I base the following recommendations. First, I always ask myself if these games are accurate and compelling representations of their respective sports. Now, this is not meant to say that I demand the most accurate simulations possible, but I just want to see that these games present the goals, objectives, and strategies of a sport in a compelling way. I then ask myself if these games are fun in a local multiplayer setting. And sports games, for me, have been the go-to options when friends are over. Well, it just represents my circle of friends, but to me it's important. I don't play online very often, so I'm not going to comment on the merits of online multiplayer experiences, but to me these games have to be fun when you're sitting there with a friend on the couch, you get a couple friends in the living room. This is when I feel sports games can be at their most compelling. And then I like to ask myself, are the control mechanics in these games accurate and intuitive? Control is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of a sports game. Increasingly refined and intuitive controls are what historically has set these games apart. And that's what made Madden and the EA NHL games great in the 16-bit era, because they really did offer a control scheme that was unique, intuitive, and you actually felt like you were controlling more of the game, more of the sport, than you had previously. And these games really require precision controls, and when these are absent or broken, the games themselves can break. So with this in mind, let's go take a look at some games. Now, I know that all of the games I'm going to present to you have earlier and later versions, so I might mention them a little bit, but I believe that these games and these iterations or these years are in fact the best I've played, and the ones that have stood out to me throughout this console generation. First up is Virtua Tennis 3 for the PlayStation 3, released in 2007. Virtua Tennis has really been one of those standout sports games ever since it was released in the arcades, and if you've ever played the arcade cabinet, then you know what these games are like. Virtua Tennis 3 on the PlayStation 3 has the same smooth controls that were present in the arcade version, but it includes excellent and really fun mini-games in the World Tour mode, which is the career mode. And these mini-games allow you to build the various attributes of your character: footwork, speed, stroke strength, and you play them a lot, but they never cease to be interesting and fun, and they become increasingly challenging. The game itself, while it is very, very much an arcade game, still, I think, captures a few important aspects of tennis. You're required to use shots to throw your opponent off of his or her rhythm, break their rhythm. You know, this is a strategy, as so far as I understand it, in real tennis. The game had superb visuals when it was released in 2007, and this was one of the first PS3 games that I picked up, and they really do hold up today. I mean, this game is colorful, it runs smoothly, the stadiums are great, the animations are great. This is a really, really beautiful visual experience for a sports game. And if you remember back to the arcades, Virtua Tennis, great to play with a friend. Same deal here. Local multiplayer is incredibly enjoyable. The mini games, though, are I think what make this. You can keep on going back to it and seeing if you can get up to the level 5 or 6 in the various mini games. Now, Virtua Tennis 4 was released about a year and a half ago now, and I was debating. Virtua Tennis 4 is a great game, and I was debating, do I choose Virtua Tennis 3 or 4? And I ultimately chose 3 because of the variety and challenge of the minigames. These are, the ones in Virtua Tennis 3 are much harder, they're much more varied, and they ultimately have allowed me to return to this game a lot over the past 6 years. Virtua Tennis 4, though, has smoother gameplay, but it also has a super shot feature, which, if you're struggling in a match, you can just sort of click this button and you have this incredible super shot that opponents almost can't defend. I mean, in a certain sense, it's like Mario Tennis. So that knocked it down for me too. Virtua Tennis 3 is just the Virtua Tennis experience, I think, in its purest form, and it's very cheap now. Find it online, find it in stores for under $10. It is a great pickup. Next we have UFC Undisputed 3 for the Xbox 360, released in 2012. Now let me preface this by saying I cannot stand the actual UFC, and I find MMA matches to be incredibly boring to watch, especially when the fighters are on the ground jockeying for position. And so when these games started coming out, I believe the first UFC Undisputed came out in 2009, they had a release in 2010, and UFC Undisputed Undisputed 3 in 2012, I was skeptical, because I cannot stand the sport. But this series has always proved to be wonderfully fun, and it's actually pretty adept at teaching the strategies and tactics of the sport, and UFC Undisputed 3 does that better than the 2 prior releases. And while these takedowns and struggles in the guard are, in my opinion, as I said, boring to watch in real life, they are incredibly rewarding in this game. I mean, to take an opponent down, control him for points, beat him into unconsciousness, or work for and get a submission, I mean, all of that is so much fun, and there's a real strategic element to it. You understand why this happens in the sport, and because of that, you don't mind being there struggling in the guard for 3-4 minutes in a round. The character models are excellent, extremely detailed, and the damage and gore is some of the best that I've seen in a fighting game. Now, if you remember the Pride promotion from back in the, I believe it started in the mid-90s and maybe went through 2006, 2007, something like that. They have a Pride mode where you can go back and play the actual Pride roster, which was populated by a lot of unique, interesting, and great fighters. So it's fun to go back and do that in this game, and you can actually bring in the current UFC fighters to fight against the Pride guys, which is a lot of fun. Each fighter feels different and uses different skills and tactics to win. So if you're fighting as a submission guy against a striker, you can't win unless you exploit those submission skills. You can't just button mash with every fighter and hope for success. The game has a very detailed control system that allows you to use these skills and abilities. And it's very adaptive to the strategies that you develop in a given fight. You can control both limbs. I use the button presses for that, and then you can use the right analog stick to jockey for position in the guard and try to get yourself into a position where you can go for the devastating ground strikes and the submissions. You can use the cage and try to position your opponent's body in such a way that it's harder to defend when he's up against the cage. So this is a system that adapts to how you want to approach a fight, which is absolutely wonderful. The local multiplayer is a lot of fun, especially if both players have really mastered the system, and it doesn't take a long time to master the control system. You just have to fight, I would say maybe 10 to 12 fights against the computer, and you understand the depth of how this game is controlled. Now, I find myself always coming back to this game. It just can really, if I'm in the mood for a more realistic fighting game, obviously not Street Fighter, King of Fighters, I come back to this, and I still don't like MMA. I hardly watch it, but this game continually proves to be so enjoyable. Like I said, the whole series was great, and this is the absolute best entry, and it is perhaps the best sports game of this console generation, because for me, it taught me the nuance and the excitement of this sport in a way that the actual product has been unable to do. Next up, we have NBA 2K11 for the Xbox 360, released in 2010. Now, I said that UFC Undisputed 3 is perhaps the best sports game of this generation. Well, NBA 2K11 is not far behind. This is a great basketball game. It has a very complex control scheme that allows you to do just about anything an NBA player can do on the court. You have a skill stick that will allow you to do incredible layups, dunks, all sorts of different spin moves, but it also has a momentum system and a weight system. So you have to have momentum on your side, and you have to be in the right position, and in some cases be the bigger, stronger guy to make this control scheme work to its advantage. And you actually can feel that weight and feel that momentum in a way that I have never seen in any other basketball game. The games themselves are well paced, and it does feel very similar to watching NBA basketball. But what clinched the game for me, and this is the reason why I just absolutely love this game, is the inclusion of historic teams from Michael Jordan's career. And this takes me back to my youth in the 80s and early 90s, when the NBA was just an incredibly hot league. Being able to play as Michael Jordan's Bulls or Magic's Lakers or Larry's Celtics, with real jerseys, real arenas, is just simply incredible. And the level of detail with which these players are brought to life is equally incredible. And they have the facial expressions, the shot release points, the follow-throughs, the abilities of these legendary players. They've just captured them with incredible accuracy. In fact, playing this game evoked memories of the NBA of that era that I had forgotten, like Terry Porter's aggressive jump shot. Now, Terry Porter is a player who, was not a superstar, who wasn't at the Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird level. No offense to Terry Porter, but I was playing a game as the 92 Portland Trailblazers, and just watching the animations brought me back to memories of that team that I didn't even know I had, that sort of reminded me of the 92 NBA Finals, when Terry Porter was just pretty hot going into that series. So the fact that a game can do that is pretty impressive. Now, I can't really speak about all the modes of this game because I usually just play with these classic rosters, and I've extended them. The game, it's probably not running now, but it had this 2K share feature which allowed you to download rosters, amongst other things, made by other players. So I downloaded the roster for the entire league from the 1989-1990 season, and when I'm playing locally here with friends, when we just load up that roster and play with all of these classic teams, and it is just a ton of fun. It really is. Now, let's not say the game's perfect. I actually have found a few faults with this game. First of all, it's a little hard to dunk. Now, yes, that's very realistic because of the momentum system, but to me, particularly against the computer, I mean, they just defend in a way that makes it very hard to pull off these moves, which is a shame because the energy and the fluidity of these great dunk animations, you just want to see them a little bit more often. And so, you know, the control scheme can feel overly complex in that regard at times, which I think they could have rectified that by maybe putting in an arcade mode where it's a little bit easier to do that. But that aside, the amount of detail and just the love for the sport and its history that went into this game is staggering. And it's likely the last basketball game I'll ever buy, and I think it's proof that when a developer really cares, they can make a great sports game that will stand the test of time. And lastly, we have EA Sports Fight Night Champion for the Xbox 360, released in 2011. This is a great visual representation of the sport of boxing. The character models are excellent, the damage modeling on the characters is very realistic, and the ring and arena designs are top-notch. It also has a very good control system. EA Sports calls it Total Punch Control. This maps your fighter's punches to the movements of the right analog stick. So if you just sort of tap towards your opponent, you get a jab. If you make quarter and half circle motions, you can get hook punches and uppercuts. It's a pretty accurate implementation of that system, I think better than the previous iterations of the series, but I nonetheless prefer the classic control scheme, which just uses the buttons to throw punches. It's an excellent local multiplayer game, and I've played it a lot with friends. Every match is fun, it's long, intense, and you could really have some dramatic matches and exciting matches with friends because there's no health bar, there's a stamina bar that you have to pay attention to, but you're just sitting there playing and wondering, looking at the damage to your fighter in the corner, and you know, you're not sure if you're about to get a knockout, so it creates a lot of drama there as you're playing the game. In addition to having a really great roster of fighters from all eras, EA Sports actually had a download, player-created download system, so you could also download more fighters and create some really dream matches for those that follow the sport of boxing, like Rocky Marciano against Mike Tyson, things like that. The story mode is pretty good for a sports game, and it is kind of EA's attempt to do something different, which is something that EA Sports doesn't always do. It basically follows a character from fighting in prison to sort of navigating the intrigues of boxing and boxing politics, and I think it works. And the narrative setup for each match is, I think, compelling, and you have pretty good voice acting, and the writing is decent, but it's the fact that this little storyline is placed within the ESPN boxing universe that ties everything together, and it can be brutal. It shows the dark underbelly of the sport, and it works, and I think it refreshed the series. In addition to finding the controls and giving you a pretty big roster of fighters, I mean, they actually did something with the overall presentation of the sport and made it work. And that's the kind of innovation that I wish I could see from EA in really some of their other sports games, like Madden, for instance. And I'm not just talking about removing a season mode, but coming up with a different and interesting way to present the sport. Now, this game is by no means perfect. I've had situations, particularly playing against friends, where it will freeze for up to 10 seconds as you're throwing a punch. And perhaps of even more concern, the button inputs aren't always accurate. A tap of, say, the right cross button will actually result in your fighter throwing 2 or 3 of those punches. And that's a problem because you really need to pay attention to your stamina. If you are low on stamina, you're easier to hit and knock down. So that is a little concerning, but it ultimately doesn't make the game unplayable. It overcomes these issues to be the best boxing game on the market because it just does everything right, from the presentation to the controls to really forcing you to pay attention to your ring position, your stamina, your angle, the angle from which you're throwing your punches. It is a very, very complete game, and it can be had for somewhere between $15 and $20, and at that price, really, really worth it. So there you have it, my list of the 4 best sports games of this console generation. Now, I realize perhaps there are others out there that warrant consideration. If you think I've missed something, or if you have another recommendation, put it in the comments below. I will, though, give an honorable mention just before I sign off here, and that is to the MLB The Show series. I have the 2008 and 2011 versions, and these really are incredibly detailed baseball games, and they really are terrific. The reason why I did not include them here is because I think they are so detailed and they simulate the sport so well that it really takes a long time to play through a single game, and because of that, it's never really made it into the rotation of sports games that I play with friends. And if just even playing it alone, if you want to play an entire season or an entire career, it will just absolutely eat up all the time that you have, to the point where, at least for me, I want to play some other games. But it is a really, really terrific representation of the sport of baseball, and if you love baseball and you have a PS3, I would definitely pick that up because I think you will absolutely enjoy it. So, again, there's the list. Go out, look for these games. They're all pretty cheap now, and they show us as players that, yeah, sports games are kind of a commodity product. They're not always interesting, but there are a few gems out there, and they can give you hours and hours of fun if you allow them to do so. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.